It was a lovely sunny afternoon on the 22nd of August 1988. 4-year-old Mari Kono had left her home in her Iruma village apartment complex located in Saitama. She headed to her friend's house, where she had often gone to play. Every time she took a trip to her friend's house, Mari returned home excited and chuffed. This time, it was different. 6:23 p.m. and still, Mari Kono was nowhere to be found. Her father, an architect, Shige Kono, had become anxious. Never before had his daughter stayed out that late. Confused on how to go about searching for his daughter, he did what any responsible dad would do: call the police. It was too late now, however. 50 kilometers away, in the thick dark forest, Mari Kono was suffering a most painful death at the hands of a truly demented being. Within minutes, she was strangled to death. The monster behind the death of our 4-year-old Mari Kono went by the name Tsutomu Miyazaki. That afternoon, as Mari made her way out of the complex where she lived to set out to her friend's place, a Nissan Langley sedan pulled up beside the 4-year-old. Miyazaki came out of the car, smiled at little Mari, and asked, "Wouldn't you like to go up somewhere where it's cool?" She was only a 4-year-old kid, and she answered the way any 4-year-old kid would have answered. Mari simply nodded in excitement. While Mari dreamed in her head of the fun she was going to have in this somewhere cool, Miyazaki drove his sedan an hour and a half till he had left the Iruma village. He came to a stop on a narrow dirt road deep in the woods near the Shinatama power station. Miyazaki stepped out of the car. He got Mari out of the car too. Together, they walked down a mountain path. It was a long walk, about 20 to 30 minutes. 4-year-old Mari couldn't sense the slightest hint of danger. For all she knew, somewhere cool was a place far away. But this was too far. Mari became tired and restless. Miyazaki became anxious and worried. He thought to himself, what if she screamed for help and drew attention? Miyazaki certainly had no intention of taking Mari to some cool place. But even worse still, he had no intention to return Mari to her parents. In a feat of sheer cruelty, Miyazaki placed his 2 hands on the throat of a 4-year-old Mari. With his thumbs on her windpipe, he pressed in and squeezed slowly. Mari had no chance. Every attempt to fight back only resulted in more pain. She struggled in vain as life slowly and painfully went out of her. Miyazaki wasn't done. Now dead, Miyazaki undressed the body of the little girl and fondled her body. After he was done, he left her body in the forest, taking her shorts, underwear, shirt, and shoes. He walked himself out of the forest and onto his car. It was the beginning of one of the most disturbing serial killing sprees in all of Japan. In the course of his stint as a serial killer, Miyazaki will kill another set of 3 young girls. Tsutomu Miyazaki was born on August 21, 1962, in Itsukaichi, Tokyo. He was born prematurely and weighed a mere 2.2 kilograms at birth. He also came into the world with his hands fused together, and so it was impossible for a young Miyazaki to bend his wrist upward. This uncommon deformation made him a laughingstock amongst his peers when he was still very young. They would mock him and call him funny hands. Miyazaki was self-conscious about his condition, and in family photos, he was careful never to show his hands. He also had the knack of closing his eyes in these photos. At elementary school, Miyazaki had mastered the art of being anonymous. He was largely unnoticed at school. He was considered the quiet loner who found it difficult to make any new friends. But this was really Miyazaki's making. It wasn't that he found it difficult to make friends, but rather he chose not to. It was his way of saving himself from further ridicule because of his peculiar condition. Nevertheless, young Miyazaki had dreams. He wanted to lead a normal, comfortable life, have a car, travel around, visit restaurants, and even relatives. But still, at elementary school, he struggled with his physical challenge, and he often blamed this condition for his inability to achieve anything concrete. Miyazaki was in fact a clever kid in school. Although stuck in a world of his own, Miyazaki was a hard-working student who studied hard. He became the first student from his junior high school to pass the entrance examination to Medai Nakano High School. Going to high school was not easy for him. Miyazaki would have to commute to school for 2 hours every day. Not long after, he lost interest in school. Instead, he buried himself in his favorite pastime, reading and drawing his own comic books. By the time he finished his final year, Miyazaki's grades were so poor that he failed to get into what was usually a customary recommendation to go to university. He finished 40th in class of 56. As expected, Miyazaki blamed nothing but his handicap. Rather than pursue admission to a university, Miyazaki enrolled for a photo technician's course at a junior college. In the spring of 1983, he graduated and proceeded to work in a printing plant owned by a friend of his father's. After working for a while and saving some money, Miyazaki went back to his family home. Growing up, Miyazaki avoided women his own age. This was likely because of his physical immaturity. His high school classmate once remarked that Miyazaki had a penis that was not longer than a toothpick or thicker than a pencil. Regardless of this, he had more than an average sex drive. At college, Miyazaki would take photos and videos of privates of female players at the tennis courts. He was also a porn addict, but he soon got bored with adult porn, complaining that they blacked out most important parts because of the law that banned showing pubic hair in Japan. This led him towards child porn. With child porn, he could see everything as there was no pubic hair, and so nothing was blacked out. Because Miyazaki had no real friends or even strong family relationships to learn about sex in the real world, he turned to videos, comics, and pornography for his thrills. True enough, none of these seemed too much out of the ordinary for a young man. It begs the question, what turned this reclusive fellow into a cold-blooded killer? It was the event of the death of his grandfather in 1988 that was the trigger. His grandfather was the only person who took a keen interest in him. It was with him he shared the only substantial warm human relationship he ever had. When his grandfather died, Miyazaki lost the last real bond he had with society. Now he was all alone, unhinged. 3 months after his grandfather's death, Miyazaki committed his first murder. His grandfather's death also further sealed his estrangement from his immediate family. On one occasion, his junior sister yelled at him for peeking at her in the bathroom. Miyazaki responded by bursting into the bathroom and smashing her head against the bathtub. In another instance, where his mother admonished him to spend more time at work and less time with his videos, Miyazaki went mad, ran towards his mother, and ruthlessly beat her. There was no grandfather to caution him, and his father had given up on talking to him a long time ago. Miyazaki became a monster let loose. Later on, Miyazaki would confess, quote, "I felt all alone, and whenever I saw a little girl playing on her own, it was almost like seeing myself." End quote. It was a confusing statement from the heart of a demented young man. Those little girls he saw would end up being his victims, 4 of them murdered in cold blood. The first was Mari Kono. The police launched a full-blown investigation into the disappearance of Mari Kono. They spent 2,930 man-days interviewing people who lived around Mark's home. They sent 50,000 posters of bearing Mari's picture to police stations, trains, subway, and bus stations throughout the whole of Japan. 4 weeks after, they still had no substantial leads. 6 weeks after Mari had disappeared, Miyazaki was at it again. It was October 3rd, 1988. While driving through Hano, Saitama Prefecture, Miyazaki spotted a 7-year-old first grader, Masami Yoshizawa. She was walking along the roadside, and just like what he did to Mari Kono, he lured Masami into his car. This time, he drove towards the hills above the Komine Pass, and there, he strangled Masami to death. He quickly stripped her naked and sexually abused her corpse. While at it, the body of the girl shook involuntarily. Miyazaki was scared to his bones. He ran straight for his car and entered in and drove off. Miyazaki left the lifeless body of Masami Yoshizawa just a mere 100 meters from where he had claimed his first victim, Mari Kono. Like Mari, Masami was declared missing. It led to a widespread search and the posting of hundreds of posters with Masami's face plastered on them. The police, again, spent days interviewing local residents. There was enough reason to be suspicious that the disappearance of Mari Kono and Masami Yoshizawa were somehow related, considering they just lived about 13 kilometers apart. Miyazaki was disturbed by Masami's death. It did not stop his demonic killing spree. On December 12, 1988, Miyazaki struck again. This time, it would be different from his first 2 victims. Her name was Erika Namba. She was only returning from her friend's house when Miyazaki spotted her and used the same old trick. He lured the 4-year-old into his sedan. But Erika was more restless than Mari. By the time Miyazaki had pulled into the parking area at the Youth Nature House in Naguri, she was already in tears. Miyazaki instructed her to undress while he began to take pictures of her in the dark. Erika was terrified. She continued sobbing. The possessed Miyazaki grabbed her by the throat and began strangling her. He held her down, resisting every effort she put into fighting back. It didn't last very long. By 7 p.m., Erika Namba was dead. She was Miyazaki's 3rd victim. Miyazaki wrapped the body in a sheet and put it in the trunk, disposing of her clothes in the woods. Afterwards, he drove off. While on the road, Miyazaki turned a corner and one of the front tires mistakenly slipped into a nearby gutter. the car got stuck. He put on the hazard lights, carried the corpse in his hands, and went into the woods to dispose of the body. He returned with the sheet in his hand to see two men standing by the car. Miyazaki explained his predicament with this car. The two men helped to lift the car, and off Miyazaki went. This time, around the police were sharp enough to link Erika's disappearance to Masami's and Mari's. Now there was a pattern. Again, they embarked on a widespread search. This time around, they found results. First, a worker at Naguri Youth Nature House found some of Erika's clothes. The next day, the police found her corpse. The two men who had helped Miyazaki the previous day were interviewed by the police. Unfortunately, they both misidentified Miyazaki's car as Toyota Corolla 2. It was a setback for the investigators, who lost a very strong lead. Despite the progress made, Miyazaki still could not be apprehended. However, he would not kill again until the summer of the following year. Miyazaki taunted the family of Mari Kano with creepy confessions of the killing of Mari, as well as the remains from her corpse. It sent the neighborhood into a frenzy. It was now clear that they had a serial killer on the prowl. On June 1st, 1989, Miyazaki spotted some elementary school girls playing. He coaxed one of them to take off her panties, and he began to photograph her. He was spotted by some neighbors who chased him off. Yet, just 5 days later, he killed his fourth victim, a 5-year-old, Ayako Nomoto. After luring her into his car to take pictures, Ayako commented on his deformed hands. It enraged Miyazaki, who grabbed her by the throat, and she died 5 minutes later. He took her corpse home, laid her naked in his house, and masturbated to it. He disposed of her body, dismembered her corpse, consumed some of the flesh, and dumped the remains in a cemetery. Once again, a fourth girl was reported missing, but it wasn't long before her corpse was found. Miyazaki's stint came to an end on July 1989 when he tried to lure two sisters. One of them ran off to get help and returned with their father, who stopped Miyazaki from taking photos of his daughter's genitals. But as Miyazaki ran to his car, the police arrived. It was over. They had caught their serial killer. Miyazaki had no choice but to confess to killing of all 4 girls. Following a psychiatric analysis, Miyazaki was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder and schizophrenia. That did not stop the courts from handing him a death sentence, as he was still found to be sane. And finally, on June 17, 2008, Tsutomu Miyazaki was executed. He was killed by hanging. And that finishes the timeline for the serial killings of one of Japan's most notorious serial killers of all time. For more information on other intriguing cases, both solved and unsolved mysteries, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell notification so you always get notified when I upload a new video. Also, don't forget to join the Ramen Army by joining the Discord server. The link for that shall be in the description below. Till next time, stay safe and stay scared.